The stars looked different from the bridge of the UES Liberty as Captain Jake Morrison watched the massive alien station grow larger through the main screen. The structure was unlike anything humans had ever built, with curved metal surfaces that seemed to flow like water and lights that pulsed in colors he had never seen before. Jake had been in space for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. His hands gripped the armrests of his command chair as the ship moved closer to what would be humanity's first official meeting with the Galactic Council. Behind him, Ambassador Lisa Carter stood quietly, reviewing her notes one last time. She wore the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic service, and her dark hair was pulled back in a neat style that made her look both professional and approachable. Lisa had spent months preparing for this meeting, learning what little they knew about alien cultures and practicing speeches that might help humanity make a good first impression. She believed this was their chance to join a peaceful community of advanced species who had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Colonel Alex Turner stood near the tactical station, his military uniform perfectly pressed and his gray hair cut short in the style that marked him as career military. Alex had served in 3 wars on Earth and had been chosen for this mission because of his experience with difficult negotiations. He watched the alien station with the careful eyes of a soldier, noting the massive size and the strange weapon-like structures that dotted its surface. Something about this meeting felt wrong to him, but he kept his concerns to himself for now. Dr. Helen Brooks sat at a science station, her tablet filled with data about the alien races they were about to meet. She was younger than the others, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes that showed her excitement about finally meeting other intelligent species. Helen had studied alien technology for years, ever since humanity had first detected signals from space, and she hoped to learn how these advanced races had solved problems that still challenged human scientists. She was particularly interested in their faster-than-light travel systems, which seemed far more advanced than Earth's own recent breakthrough. Sam Rodriguez, the cultural attaché, paced nervously near the communication station. He had learned several alien languages and studied their customs, but he worried that humans might accidentally offend these powerful beings through some cultural mistake. Sam had seen how badly first contact could go in Earth's history books, and he knew that one wrong word could doom humanity's chances of joining the galactic community. His job was to help avoid those mistakes. But the pressure was enormous. The Liberty had been traveling for 3 weeks to reach this meeting point in the Kepler 442 system. Earth's fastest ship, it represented the best of human technology, though Jake knew it was probably primitive compared to what the aliens could build. The ship carried a crew of 50, all carefully chosen for their skills and their ability to represent humanity well. Everyone aboard understood that this mission could determine whether humans would be welcomed into the galaxy or forced to remain isolated on their single world. The alien station was called the Nexus, according to the brief message that had summoned them here. It orbited a blue-green world that looked remarkably like Earth, though scans showed no signs of intelligent life on the surface. The station itself was massive, easily 10 times larger than Earth's biggest space stations, and it clearly served as a meeting place for the 12 species that made up the Galactic Council. Jake had tried to imagine what it would be like to meet beings from 12 different worlds, but his mind could barely grasp the scope of such diversity. The summons had arrived 6 months ago, delivered by a small alien probe that had appeared in Earth's solar system. The message was simple and direct. Humanity had been observed and was required to appear before the Galactic Council to discuss their future in the galaxy. There had been no negotiation, no option to decline. The probe had provided coordinates and a date, then disappeared back into space before Earth ships could intercept it. The message had caused panic in some government circles, but most leaders saw it as the opportunity humanity had been waiting for. As the Liberty approached the docking bay, Jake could see other ships already moored to the station. Some were sleek and curved like works of art, while others were angular and mechanical in appearance. One ship seemed to be made entirely of some kind of crystal that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. Another looked more like a living creature than a machine, with what appeared to be breathing motions along its hull. The variety was both exciting and intimidating. The docking procedure was handled entirely by the station's systems. Jake's crew had no control as invisible forces guided their ship into a berth that seemed perfectly sized for the Liberty. The process was smooth and gentle, showing a level of technology that impressed even Jake's experienced engineers. Once docked, the ship's sensors detected a breathable atmosphere in the docking bay, though the air mixture was different from Earth's. Lisa Carter gathered her team in the main conference room for a final briefing. She reminded them that they were representing all of humanity, and that their behavior here would be remembered for generations. Alex Turner discussed security protocols, emphasizing that they were guests and should avoid any actions that might be seen as hostile. Helen Brooks reviewed what they knew about each alien species, which was unfortunately very little. Sam Rodriguez went over basic courtesy rules that seemed to be common among the known alien cultures. The airlock chimed, indicating that the aliens were ready to receive them. Jake remained on the bridge with most of the crew while the diplomatic team prepared to disembark. Lisa looked around at her companions one last time, seeing the same mixture of excitement and nervousness in their faces that she felt in her own heart. This was the moment that would change everything for humanity, one way or another. The team walked through the airlock and into the alien station, not knowing that they were walking into a trap that had been set before their ship had even been built. The Galactic Council had made their decision about humanity's fate long before this meeting, and the tribunal that awaited them was nothing more than a formality before the sentence was carried out. The corridor that led from the docking bay was unlike anything the human team had ever seen. The walls seemed to pulse with a soft, organic light that shifted colors as they walked, and the floor felt strange beneath their feet, as if it was alive and responding to their presence. Ambassador Lisa Carter led the group, followed by Colonel Alex Turner, Dr. Helen Brooks, and Sam Rodriguez. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the alien architecture, creating sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The escort that met them consisted of 4 insectoid beings that stood nearly 7 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in smooth, dark carapaces that reflected the corridor's shifting lights, and their faces were dominated by large, multifaceted eyes that never seemed to blink. They moved with precise mechanical steps and spoke in clicking sounds that the translation devices struggled to interpret. The devices had been provided by the Council along with the original summons, but they only worked for basic communication. Lisa tried to make conversation with their escorts, asking about the station and expressing humanity's gratitude for being invited to meet the Council. The insectoid beings responded with short, emotionless phrases that made it clear they were not interested in friendly discussion. They were guards, not diplomats, and their job was simply to deliver the humans to their destination. Alex noticed that each guard carried what looked like weapons, though their design was so alien that he could not guess how they might work. The journey through the station took nearly 20 minutes, and the humans saw many other species along the way. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, while others moved on multiple limbs or seemed to float without touching the ground at all. A few beings were so strange that Helen could not even determine what parts of their bodies might serve as heads or hands. The diversity was overwhelming, and it made the humans feel very small and primitive in comparison. The council chamber was enormous, with a domed ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever into darkness. The floor was made of the same organic material as the corridors, but here it was arranged in concentric circles that led down to a central platform where the humans were directed to stand. Around them, rising up in tiers like an ancient amphitheater, were the seats occupied by representatives of 12 different alien species. Lisa looked around the chamber, trying to identify the different races from the brief descriptions they had been given. The Zephyrians were easy to spot, with their tall reptilian bodies and scales that shifted color depending on their mood. They seemed to be the leaders, occupying the highest tier of seats and speaking in voices that carried clearly through the vast space. Near them sat the Vortani, crystalline beings whose bodies caught and refracted light in beautiful but alien patterns. Other species were harder to identify. Some looked like walking plants with bark-like skin and leaves that moved without any breeze. Others appeared to be made of metal or some kind of living rock. A few seemed to exist partially in this dimension and partially somewhere else, their forms shifting and wavering like images seen through water. The variety was both fascinating and terrifying, showing just how alone humanity was in a galaxy full of ancient, advanced civilizations. High Counselor Vextar of the Zephyrians stood to address the humans. His voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily through the translation devices. He explained that the Council had been watching humanity for several decades, ever since Earth's radio signals had first reached space. They had observed human behavior, studied human history, and analyzed human technology. Based on this observation, the Council had concerns about allowing humanity to spread freely through the galaxy. The Counselor activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber with images from Earth's history. The humans watched, in growing horror as scenes of warfare, environmental destruction, and social conflict played out in vivid detail above their heads. Every human war, every act of violence, every environmental disaster was displayed for the alien audience to see. The images were accompanied by statistics showing human population growth, resource consumption, and technological advancement, all presented in a way that made humanity look dangerous and irresponsible. Dr. Brooks stepped forward to defend her species, explaining that humans had also created great art, made scientific discoveries, and shown capacity for peace and cooperation. She talked about human achievements in medicine, space exploration, and environmental protection. She pointed out that humanity had overcome many of its past problems and was working to build a better future. Her voice was passionate and sincere, and she believed that the aliens would understand that humans were capable of growth and change. But the Council members remained unmoved by her arguments. One of the plant-like beings spoke in a voice like rustling leaves, saying that every violent species made the same claims about their potential for peace. Another representative, whose body seemed to be made of flowing liquid metal, pointed out that humanity's rapid technological advancement made them particularly dangerous. They had gone from primitive agriculture to space travel in just a few thousand years, a pace of development that alarmed species who had taken millions of years to achieve the same progress. The Vortani representative spoke in musical tones that the translation devices rendered as cold, logical statements. They argued that humanity's tendency toward individual achievement and competition, while useful for rapid advancement, made them unsuitable for the cooperative nature required by the Galactic Council. Humans, they claimed, were too unpredictable and too focused on their own interests to be trusted with access to galactic civilization. As the accusations continued, Alex Turner began to notice something troubling about the proceedings. This did not feel like a trial or a hearing where both sides would be allowed to present their case. The aliens had already made up their minds about humanity, and they were simply going through the motions of a formal process. He caught Lisa's eye and saw that she was beginning to realize the same thing. This was not a negotiation or an opportunity to prove humanity's worth. This was a sentencing. High Counselor Vexitar stood again and outlined the three options that the Council was considering for humanity's future. The first was permanent quarantine, where humans would be confined to their solar system and prevented from developing faster-than-light travel beyond their current primitive level. The second was relocation to a designated world where they could live under Council supervision. The third option was not stated explicitly, but the implication was clear from the silence that followed. Sam Rodriguez tried to argue that humanity deserved a chance to prove themselves, that they could learn to be peaceful members of the galactic community. He spoke eloquently about human culture, human values, and human potential, but his words fell on deaf ears, or whatever organs these aliens used for hearing. The Council had heard similar arguments before, from other species that no longer existed, to make them. As the session continued, Lisa realized that they were not really being judged on their merits or their potential. They were being judged on their threat to the established order, and the Council had apparently decided that any threat, no matter how small, was too much to risk. The tension in the Council chamber had grown thick enough to cut with a knife, as Ambassador Lisa Carter realized that humanity was not on trial, but had already been condemned. The alien representatives continued their deliberations in languages that the translation devices could barely interpret. their voices creating a strange symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that filled the vast space. Lisa exchanged worried glances with her team members, all of whom were beginning to understand that this meeting was not what they had hoped it would be. Captain Jake Morrison sat on the bridge of the Liberty, monitoring the diplomatic team through their communication badges while keeping watch on the alien station's activities. His years of military experience had taught him to pay attention to details that others might miss, and several things about their situation were making him increasingly uncomfortable. The station's defensive systems had powered up shortly after their arrival, and he could detect the energy signatures of weapons that were far more advanced than anything in Earth's arsenal. More troubling were the encrypted messages that had begun arriving from Earth through the quantum communication link that connected the Liberty to home. Admiral Frank Hayes had sent increasingly urgent reports about unusual activity throughout human space. Long-range sensors had detected massive alien fleet movements toward several of Earth's newer colonies, including New Geneva and Port Sterling. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, and Jake was beginning to suspect that the diplomatic meeting was nothing more than a distraction. In the council chamber, Dr. Helen Brooks had been given access to a data terminal that was supposed to allow her to review information about galactic civilization and the council's history. The aliens had presented this as a courtesy, allowing humanity to better understand the community they hoped to join. But as Helen dug deeper into the historical records, she found information that made her blood run cold. The database contained records of 17 different species that had been encountered by the Council over the past 10,000 years, all of them marked with the same designation that had been applied to humanity. Each of these species had been young and aggressive by galactic standards, showing rapid technological advancement and expansionist tendencies that the Council found concerning. The records showed that each species had been brought before the Council for evaluation, just as humanity was being evaluated now. And in every case, the species had been found wanting and had subsequently disappeared from galactic records. There were no follow-up reports, no records of successful quarantine or relocation efforts, just empty files where thriving civilizations had once been documented. Helen's hands trembled as she accessed more detailed records, using her scientific training to piece together the truth that the Council had hidden. The peaceful Galactic Council maintained their stability and security through systematic genocide, eliminating any species that showed potential to challenge the established order. The 17 vanished species had not been quarantined or relocated, they had been exterminated, their worlds sterilized and their histories erased from official records. Meanwhile, Colonel Alex Turner had been watching the Council proceedings with growing alarm. His military background had taught him to recognize the signs of a predetermined outcome, and everything about this tribunal suggested that the aliens had made their decision about humanity long before the Liberty had ever left Earth. The way the guards positioned themselves, the formal language used by the Council members, and the complete dismissal of any evidence in humanity's favor all pointed to the same conclusion. Alex activated his communication link to Captain Morrison, using a coded frequency that the aliens hopefully could not monitor. He reported his assessment of the situation and recommended that the ship prepare for immediate departure. Jake acknowledged the message and began quietly alerting his crew to the possibility of combat. The Liberty was not a warship, but it carried defensive systems that might buy them enough time to escape if necessary. On Earth, Admiral Hayes was coordinating humanity's response to what was clearly a coordinated alien attack. The fleets approaching human colonies were massive, consisting of ships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. But Hayes had not risen to his position by backing down from impossible odds, and he had been preparing for this possibility ever since the Council's first message had arrived. Earth's military had spent months developing contingency plans for exactly this scenario. The human colonies under attack were not the helpless targets that the Council expected them to be. Each settlement had been established with defense in mind, and their populations included many veterans who had experience fighting in Earth's various conflicts. More importantly, humans had a talent for adaptation and improvisation that the aliens had not anticipated. When conventional weapons proved ineffective against alien technology, the colonists began using their industrial equipment in creative Ways. At New Geneva, Commander Rick Foster found himself leading a desperate defense against alien forces that seemed unstoppable. The colony's military equipment was no match for the alien weapons, but Rick had learned during his service on Earth that sometimes the best weapons were the ones your enemy did not expect. Mining charges became improvised artillery, construction. Mechs were converted into mobile weapons platforms, and even farming equipment was pressed into service as the colonists fought for their lives. Back in the council chamber, Lisa Carter made one final attempt to appeal to whatever sense of justice the aliens might possess. She spoke passionately about humanity's potential for growth, their capacity for learning from mistakes, and their desire to contribute positively to galactic civilization. She pointed out that every species must have gone through a similar period of growth and development, and that judging humanity by their past rather than their potential was unfair. But High Counselor Vextar cut her off with a dismissive gesture. He explained that the council had heard these arguments before, from many species that had proven unable to control their aggressive tendencies. The galaxy was too precious and too fragile to risk on the possibility that humanity might eventually become peaceful. The decision had been made, and it was final. Dr. Brooks looked up from her data terminal with horror written across her face. She had found the smoking gun that revealed the council's true nature, but she knew that revealing it might get them all killed immediately. The information she had discovered could change everything, but only if they could survive long enough to share it with the rest of humanity. She caught Lisa's eye and nodded toward the data terminal, hoping the ambassador would understand the significance of what she had found. The council session was drawing to a close, and the aliens were preparing to announce their final verdict on humanity's fate. The insectoid guards had moved closer to the human delegation, their weapons clearly visible and ready for use. Alex Turner calculated the distances and angles, knowing that any attempt to fight their way out would be suicidal, but also knowing that they might not have any choice. Captain Morrison received one final message from Admiral Hayes, informing him that the attacks on human colonies had begun, but that the resistance was stronger than expected. Humanity was fighting back with everything they had, turning every piece of technology into a weapon and every settlement into a fortress. The aliens had expected an easy victory, but they were discovering that humans were much more dangerous, when cornered, than they had anticipated. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just humanity's fate, but the future of the entire galaxy. The Council was about to learn that their policy of preemptive elimination had worked, because they had never before encountered a species quite like humanity. Dr. Helen Brooks stood up from the data terminal with her heart pounding so hard she was sure the aliens could hear it. The information she had discovered was so shocking that she could barely believe what she was reading, but the evidence was undeniable. The Galactic Council, which presented itself as a peaceful organization dedicated to maintaining harmony in the galaxy, was actually built on a foundation of systematic murder that stretched back 10,000 years. The records showed 17 species that had been eliminated, not because they were evil or dangerous, but simply because they showed potential to grow beyond their current limitations. Each species had been brought before the Council, judged by the same criteria now being applied to humanity, and then quietly erased from existence. Their worlds had been sterilized, their populations exterminated, and their histories deleted from official records. The peaceful galaxy that the Council claimed to protect was peaceful only because anyone who might disturb that peace had been killed. Helen looked around the chamber at the alien representatives, seeing them now with completely different eyes. These were not wise elders guiding younger species toward enlightenment. They were predators who had maintained their dominance through fear and violence. The reptilian Zephyrians, the crystalline Vortani, the plant-like beings, and all the others, had participated in genocide on a scale that dwarfed anything in human history, and now they were preparing to add humanity to their list of extinct species. Ambassador Lisa Carter noticed Helen's expression and realized that something important had happened. She made eye contact with her science officer and saw the mixture of horror and determination in Helen's face. Whatever Helen had discovered, it was significant enough to change the entire situation. Lisa knew she had to create an opportunity for Helen to share her findings, but the council was clearly moving toward announcing their final verdict. High Counselor Vextar rose from his seat, his reptilian features showing what might have been satisfaction. The debate was over, he announced, and the council had reached a unanimous decision regarding humanity's future. The humans would be given one final chance to speak before the verdict was delivered, though it was clear that nothing they said would change the outcome. This was merely a formality, a way for the council to maintain the pretense that they had given humanity a fair hearing. Lisa stepped forward, knowing that this might be their only chance to reveal what Helen had discovered. She began speaking about the importance of truth and justice in any civilized society, building toward the revelation that would expose the council's crimes. But before she could get to the crucial information, Helen interrupted her, unable to contain her outrage any longer. Helen activated the chamber's holographic display system, using her access to the data terminal to project the evidence she had found for all to see. The records of the 17 extinct species appeared in the air above the chamber, showing their names, their homeworlds, and the dates of their elimination. The display showed population counts in the billions, reduced to 0 with clinical efficiency. It showed thriving civilizations with art, science, and culture, all erased because they had the potential to challenge the established order. The effect on the council chamber was immediate and dramatic. Several of the alien representatives began speaking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of surprise, anger, and what might have been fear. Some species seemed genuinely shocked by the revelation, suggesting that not all council members had been aware of the systematic genocide program. Others appeared more concerned about the exposure of their secrets than about the crimes themselves. The Vortani representative spoke in crystalline tones that rang like bells throughout the chamber. They argued that the preservation of galactic peace sometimes required difficult decisions, and that the elimination of potentially dangerous species was a necessary evil. The alternative, they claimed, was chaos and warfare on a scale that would destroy civilization itself. Better to sacrifice a few species than to risk the stability of the entire galaxy. But other species were not convinced by this argument. One of the floating ethereal beings spoke in whispers that somehow carried throughout the vast space. They questioned when the council had become judges and executioners rather than guides and teachers. Another representative, whose body seemed to be made of living metal, pointed out that the eliminated species had never been given a real chance to prove themselves worthy of survival. High Counselor Vextar tried to restore order to the proceedings, but the revelation had shattered the unity that the council had maintained for millennia. The debate that followed was chaotic and angry, with species that had never questioned council policy suddenly demanding answers about decisions made long before their time. The careful facade of peaceful cooperation began to crumble as the truth about the council's methods became impossible to deny. Colonel Alex Turner used the confusion to activate his communication link with Captain Morrison, transmitting the evidence that Helen had discovered along with a warning that their situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. Jake received the transmission and immediately began broadcasting the information to Earth and to every human colony within range. The evidence of the Council's genocide program would spread throughout human space within hours, ensuring that, even if the diplomatic team did not survive, their sacrifice would not be in vain. On the human colony worlds, the fighting had intensified as more alien ships arrived to begin what they thought would be a simple extermination mission. But the colonists had received the broadcasted evidence and now understood exactly what they were fighting for. This was not just a battle for their individual settlements. This was a fight for the survival of their entire species. The knowledge that the aliens had done this to 17 other civilizations before them gave the human defenders a grim determination that their enemies had not expected. Commander Rick Foster at New Geneva found that the alien forces were struggling to adapt to human tactics that seemed to make no sense by galactic standards. The humans used their mining equipment to create underground tunnel systems that allowed them to attack alien positions from unexpected angles. They converted their agricultural chemicals into improvised weapons that were far more effective than anyone had anticipated. Most importantly, they fought with a desperate creativity that constantly surprised their enemies. The alien commanders had experience fighting other species, but those species had followed predictable patterns of warfare that made them easy to defeat. Humans seemed to have no standard patterns at all, adapting their tactics constantly and turning every piece of civilian technology into a potential weapon. Construction mechs became mobile fortresses, communication satellites became guidance systems for improvised missiles, and even children's toys were modified into reconnaissance devices. Back in the council chamber, the debate had become increasingly heated as more species began to question the council's authority and methods. Some representatives demanded a complete review of all past decisions, while others insisted that the genocide program was necessary for galactic stability. The unity that had held the council together for thousands of years was dissolving before the humans' eyes. High Counselor Vextar finally managed to restore some semblance of order, but his authority had been severely undermined by the revelations. He announced that regardless of the debate about past decisions, the question of humanity's fate still needed to be resolved. The humans had proven themselves to be dangerous by exposing classified information and causing dissent within the council. This only confirmed that they were too unpredictable and too troublesome to be allowed to survive. But the insectoid guards who had been standing ready to arrest the human delegation hesitated when some council members began objecting to summary execution. The political situation had become too complex for simple violence, and even the guards were unsure about which orders they should follow. The revelation of the genocide program had created fractures within the council that could not be easily repaired. Lisa Carter realized that they had achieved something unprecedented in the council's history. They had not only exposed the truth about the genocide program, but they had also created doubt and division among species that had been united for millennia. The question now was whether they could survive long enough to take advantage of the chaos they had created. The chaos in the council chamber reached a breaking point, as species that had been allies for millennia turned against each other in heated argument. The revelation of the systematic genocide program had shattered the careful balance of power that had maintained galactic peace for 10,000 years. Some species demanded immediate investigations into past decisions, while others insisted that the extermination policy had been necessary for the greater good. The unity that had once made the council invincible was crumbling before everyone's eyes. High Counselor Vextar attempted to restore order by commanding the immediate arrest of the human delegation, but his authority had been severely undermined. Several council members objected to executing beings who had only revealed the truth about the council's crimes. The insectoid guards looked confused, unsure which orders to follow as different species gave conflicting commands. The political structure that had seemed so stable just hours before was collapsing into chaos. Captain Jake Morrison used the confusion to his advantage, launching the Liberty from its docking bay while the station's defensive systems were temporarily offline due to the political crisis. The ship's engines roared to life as Jake pushed them to maximum power, knowing that they had only minutes before the aliens resolved their internal disputes and turned their attention back to the escaping humans. The Liberty was fast, but it was not fast enough to outrun the advanced alien warships if they decided to pursue. As the ship cleared the station's immediate defensive perimeter, Jake received urgent communications from Earth and the human colonies. The situation throughout human space had changed dramatically in just a few hours. What had begun as a series of surprise attacks by overwhelming alien forces had turned into something completely different. The human colonies were not only surviving the assault, they were actually beginning to push back against their attackers. The alien military commanders had planned their campaigns based on the assumption that humans would fight like other species they had eliminated in the past. They expected conventional tactics, predictable responses, and eventual surrender when the hopelessness of resistance became apparent. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to have no concept of conventional warfare and refused to accept that any situation was hopeless. At New Geneva, Commander Rick Foster had turned his agricultural colony into a fortress, using nothing but farming equipment, mining tools, and human ingenuity. The colonists had connected their underground irrigation systems to create a network of tunnels that allowed them to move unseen beneath the battlefield. They had modified their crop-dusting aircraft to deliver improvised weapons with devastating effectiveness. Most importantly, They had demonstrated the human talent for turning any technology into a weapon when survival was at stake. The alien forces attacking. New Geneva found themselves constantly surprised by tactics that made no sense according to their military training. Humans would retreat from a position only to attack it from underground minutes later. They would appear to be completely defeated, then launch counterattacks using equipment that no civilized species would ever consider to be weapons. Construction mechs became mobile artillery platforms. Communication satellites were used to guide improvised missiles. And even the colony's weather control system was weaponized to create blinding dust storms that favored the defending humans. Similar scenes were playing out at human settlements throughout the galaxy. At Port Sterling, colonists had turned their asteroid mining operation into a missile manufacturing facility, launching chunks of rock at alien ships with accuracy that defied all expectations. At New Terra, settlers had modified their hydroponics systems to produce chemical weapons that were far more effective than anything in the alien arsenal. Every human colony seemed to have its own unique approach to the problem of fighting technologically superior enemies. The alien commanders began sending increasingly desperate reports back to their home worlds. The humans were not following any recognizable patterns of warfare, and they seemed to be completely immune to the psychological tactics that had proven effective against other species. Worse, the humans appeared to be learning and adapting faster than the aliens could adjust their own strategies. Equipment that had worked against human defenses in the morning was useless by afternoon, as the humans found new ways to counter. Dr. Helen Brooks used the Liberty's communication system to broadcast the evidence of the Council's genocide program to every human settlement and to any alien species willing to listen. The information spread like wildfire through communication, networks that the Council could not control, reaching worlds and species that had never questioned the official version of galactic history. The revelation that their peaceful civilization was built on systematic murder began to undermine the Council's authority throughout the galaxy. Ambassador Lisa Carter composed a final message to be broadcast to the Galactic Council and to any species that would listen. She spoke calmly and clearly, explaining that humanity had come to the galaxy seeking friendship and cooperation, only to discover that the Council maintained its power through fear and violence. The humans had not wanted this conflict, but they would not allow themselves to be quietly exterminated like the 17 species before them. Lisa's message continued with a warning that the Council had made a fatal error in their calculations. They had assumed that humans would react to overwhelming force the same way other species had reacted, by surrendering or fighting according to predictable patterns. Instead, the Council had created exactly what they claimed to fear most: a united, angry, and now experienced human military that understood there could be no peace with an organization built on genocide. The message concluded with a promise that humanity would not be content to simply survive this assault. The Council had demonstrated that peaceful coexistence was impossible as long as they maintained their policy of preemptive extermination. Therefore, humans would carry the fight to the Council's core worlds, seeking not conquest, but the complete dismantling of a system that had murdered billions of innocent beings over the millennia. As the Liberty reached safe distance from the Council station, Jake Morrison received a priority communication from Admiral Frank Hayes on Earth. The Admiral had been coordinating humanity's response to the alien attacks, and his report was both sobering and encouraging. Human casualties had been heavy in the initial assaults, but the colonies were holding and even beginning to counterattack. More importantly, Earth's hastily assembled fleet was ready to take the fight to the enemy. Admiral Hayes had spent months preparing for exactly this scenario, understanding that humanity's first contact with alien civilizations might not go as hoped. Earth shipyards had been working around the clock to build vessels that could serve as both exploration ships and warships if necessary. The fleet that Hayes had assembled was not as technologically advanced as the alien forces, but it was crewed by humans who now understood exactly what they were fighting for. The final scene played out on the bridge of Earth's flagship, the UES Defiance, as Admiral Hayes addressed his fleet commanders. The ships spread out before him represented everything humanity could put into space on short notice: converted cargo vessels, modified research ships, and the few purpose-built warships that Earth had managed to complete. It was not an impressive force by galactic standards, but it was commanded by a species that had just learned the true cost of failure. Hayes looked out at the stars that no longer seemed friendly or welcoming, knowing that humanity was about to embark on a war unlike anything in their history. The Galactic Council had wanted to judge humans by their past, viewing their history of conflict as evidence of their unfitness for galactic civilization. The aliens were about to discover that this history had also taught humans how to fight, how to adapt, and how to survive against impossible odds. The Admiral activated the fleet communication system and delivered his final orders before the attack began. The Council had made their choice when they decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Now they would learn what it really meant to be afraid of humans. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the species you try to eliminate before they become a threat are the ones you should have feared most of all.